pressure, especially when people are so negative and they're so uncivil and all those things. So I really appreciate that. And Brand, you are my favorite. He is my favorite. I can announce it. And I love your intelligence. I love when you take an issue and you really thoroughly think about it intelligently, because that's representation of the city of Redondo. And I really take offense when people come up here and call the residents dumb or they make comments. Unless you're in support of me, don't say anything. So we are all together in this. We are all residents. And there's a lot of beautiful people with great things to say. And we have the right to communicate at any time we want. Everybody has the right to communicate. So it is better to deserve honors and not have them than to have them and not deserve them. Who said that? Mark Twain. Okay. And then I love Redondo. I came to Redondo because I love the charm of the city. So I also get offended when people want to put down the city of Redondo and the residents and make it seem like it's so awful that we need something like this. I haven't heard once about people saying enhance. Why haven't they enhanced what's already in existence? And it's always about this millennials, the young people. Well, how many young people are really in the city of Redondo? How many are 50 plus? How many are 50 plus in this whole room? Raise your hand if you're over 50. Okay. So there's something that comes to say, even just because it's old doesn't mean you throw it out. Just because your parent turns 90 and can't remember or can't see, you throw them out. That's how I feel about the city of Redondo. And one time I came here and said there's a spirit in the city, okay? And if you squash that spirit, people are going to rebel. And it's okay for them to rebel. If you look at the school district, if you look at the students, they're all talking about being mindful, saying what they want to feel. We're trying to raise children to come and say what they feel. So I am addressing the CentraCal, but I'm addressing an issue that's about spirituality, about soulfulness. And so once you lose that, you're going to lose everything. And so the city of Redondo has a spirit and charm, and there are people in support of that. I'm not about overdevelopment. I'm not about not improving, but I am about throwing away what's already there. A lot of our mom and pops have gone out of business for what? What are we trying to achieve? I think it's greed.
Thank you. Okay. All right, come on down.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Leslie Campeggi, Redondo Beach. I thought that the gentleman from Layton Construction made an interesting statement. He said that he'd worked with CentraCal for years on this project, and because of the soil and other conditions, nobody else, actually, he said, everybody else would run from this project. Wow, so why is CentraCal interested in it? Susie Royds brought up an interesting point, and that is the financing. Maybe CentraCal can sell the entitlements before they have to worry about bankruptcy, or sell the entitlements through their shell corporation and avoid bankruptcy, because what we saw in the city staff report, it may take at least 23 years to break even. Those are not good financing numbers, and I'm not an unqualified, ill-informed amateur at looking at financials, as many who are doing the same in this room are not unqualified, ill-informed amateurs either. Because this is 10 years in the making, and the marketing terms of city staff, an unprecedented investment doesn't make it a good investment. This started originally, I think it was around a $200 million project when we first looked at it. Nowhere in the city staff report did I see any alternative other than CentraCal or hypothetical city. There are other alternatives besides those two, and one could include a different partner. So why is that not presented, and why are we basing something on a hypothetical in the first place? That's not good financial business to do. There isn't anybody in this room who wants the harbor to stay the same. We do want it revitalized, but not with double the traffic and double the development, with an EIR that still says that there's no traffic impact to that and to the city. So I would urge you to actually let the ENA expire, open it up to other development opportunities that perhaps include the AES site that is also available. And perhaps Erica Robinson might want to call Bill Brand and ask for his advice on that rather than assume that he's not going to agree with her and not make the call in the first place. And as far as the comment that Bill Brand is so powerful that he actually got CalPERS to stand down from financing this with CenterCal, that's the most ludicrous thing that I've ever heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, come on down.
Good evening again, Council, Mayor, Wayne Craig, District 1. And before I continue, I'd just like to say that there is an answer for this problem. Yes on C, keep our pier mall free. One thing I'd like to say about the yes on C, keep them all pier free, is that none of us are against development. We are actually for a reasonable development. In fact, raise your hands. You guys are all for development, right? Yay! There's a lot of people that really want to have something done. We just want something better. Now, a couple of things that were the financial forecasts are kind of alarming is that 11 years, maybe it'll do good with this magical halo effect. 23 years, probably. Back when I was in college, I'm one of the 50-something-year-old, like the woman there said earlier, there was a candidate who was running for president. He was running against a guy named Ronald Reagan. The guy's name was George Bush. He coined a great phrase I think we should all remember right now tonight. It was called voodoo economics. The estimate that is being portrayed here shows that doesn't take into account vacancies or the failure of the movie theater. I think we could all see that movie theaters are certainly not a growing growth opportunity. CenterCal likes movie theaters because they're going to buy a multiple-year lease because that will actually help them their occupancy rate, so they could probably sell the project within 3 or 4 years. Just saying. So that estimate really is pretty optimistic. The city also didn't evaluate a realistic mall performance or a worst-case scenario. More likely, the existing businesses on the mall will lose revenues as the project cannibalizes their current customers away, and traffic is going to scare people away. So that's not going to increase things. It's going to make it harder for people to come down here in the first place. The interesting thing about the project analysis is that it assumes zero participation by any developer or a lease, which really is not realistic. It also ignores that the parking structure can be refurbished. That's an interesting thing. But one fascinating thing I found in this is that it's interesting to note that the cost estimated in the study are a lot less than those that were evaluated in the analysis of Measure C. You would think that the same cost would be an apples-to-apples comparison, but for Measure C, they're much more expensive because that way it costs $200 million to make it work, and maybe involves a $25 million swimming pool that is nowhere and anywhere that we've seen. So once again, I think we need to do some different options here. As Ms. Campesini said a minute ago, the AES power plant is available. Let's do a structured major plan that takes into account both locations. We could spread out the density and make this better for the city of Redondo for the next 99 years, not the next 10 years for a developer who's going to be gone in 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on down.
Mayor, staff, City Council. My name is Eugene Solomon. District 2, moved to Redondo Beach in 1985. All over the place. So with regard to the financials, Mr. Cosmont himself talked about retail spaces going out of business every day, trendy restaurants going out of business every day, and 64% of this project is deteriorating business models. There was a report that movie ticket sales are their lowest in a century. So with 64% of the project being deteriorating business models, ask Mr. Cosmont, retail goes out of business every day with parking right in front. We're relying on quite a bit. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. I'll bring it up again, when it comes to the 9% rate of return on capitalized costs, you really need to better define capitalized costs. You're going to rely on GAAP standards, and all you have to do is look at Enron and see how easily GAAP standards are manipulated in order to lose money, in order to gain money. It's very malleable, and you really should have a very firm definition of what that's going to be, especially since we're using rent enhancement of that 10% or 9%, rather than something like 3% of the gross revenues, like you do in many lease agreements, like CenterCal would do. To answer Mr. Bardeen, how do we get the option removed? Well, the mayor or the council decided to spend $9 million to remove the option, because that's what's going to be on the agenda next. For Ms. Irvine, I would tell you that we know who the financing is going to be. It's Westport Capital. That's the same Westport Capital whose founder was had a $19 million judgment against him by his former partners for a breach of fiduciary duty. Bob Graham, the former governor of Florida and the senator from Florida, once told me that talking to a politician is like playing a carnival game. It's fixed for you to lose. That person who's running the game, he's either looking to stuff money in his own pockets or he's looking to stuff money into the pockets of one of his friends. So you see us standing here, but you don't see us. You listen to us speak, but you don't hear us. Because I don't make donations to the Chamber of Commerce or have a big leasehold like Mr. Resnick, which I think is the reason why the option's gone, because Mr. Resnick objected. And I don't have $6,500 like the Pormandaris to donate to a politician to have my property rezoned. It doesn't happen. So it feels like a carnival game to a lot of us. You won't put it up for an advisory vote. You don't hear us. You don't want to hear us. Mr. Mayor, you said on December 13th, when they canceled the public hearing, you can come up here and say whatever you want, but it's not going to mean anything. And that's really discouraging for members of the general public to hear from their elected officials. I would think it would mean something. I would hope that you were listening. I would hope that you would take under consideration those people who don't donate heavily, those people who aren't part of a lobbying group.
So your time's up. I am listening.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Come on down.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Paul Moses, District 2. I have a real short statement. It looks like all the concerns were addressed that people came up here and they were so outraged about in the last meeting. So good job well done to the staff concerning that. There is something about the phased approach that it does double the construction time, and that doesn't favor CenterCal at all. That is quite a give by CenterCal, because they're going to spend twice as much money building this thing now. So I think that's they've done us a favor in that much. Thank you.
Thank you. Not going to beg you. Hello.
Hi, Gina DiPietro, District 1, and this is Mike. Mike wants to go on vacation. He is really looking forward to it. In fact, he saved all year to go on vacation at the beach, and he wants to come to Redondo Beach. And you know why he wants to come to Redondo Beach? The beach and the women in bikinis. This is such a no-brainer. We have a beach community. You should leave it open for beach needs and uses, like people getting sun and going in the water and frolicking amongst the dolphins and the sea lions, which they actually do. I have had a sea lion swim up next to my feet. It's a no-brainer for our buddy Mike here. He wants to come to the beach. He does not want to go to Crate and Barrel. He does not want to go to Williams and Sonoma. These are not places that he wants to walk through on his way to the beach either. It really is very simple. Redondo Beach relies on tourist dollars. And Mike here, our tourist friend, he likes to come to the beach and use the beach as it is. So I would hope that we could maintain the beach as it stands, improve it, make it good for him to come and enjoy his vacation and not have to deal with a mall. He's got a mall back at home in Ohio.
Okay. You wonder why we do listen. That is fun. That's pretty fun. But Mike didn't get his 3 minutes.
Mike never gets his
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Nils Narenheim, official candidate for the District 1 council seat. So the entire point of this project was so that we could get a new pier parking structure. Now we're spending $20 million of our own money for all these other things, which is great. Maybe we should do these parts of the project first. We're also spending another $9 million to buy out a lease early. That's a lot of money. Things that we said were promised to us before that we weren't supposed to be paying for. If we're paying so much money for this infrastructure, maybe we should be doing these things first, like the boat launch ramp, improving the Seaside Lagoon. Seems like there's a lot of money in the kitty right now and all these different funds for all these different projects. So we could do what Dana Point has done and do all these infrastructure upgrades first that we're paying for, then come back and do them all. As Mr. Eugene Solomon has said, we could amortize, CenterCal could amortize these costs and their losses over multiple years. Thereby, they don't ever get their 9% rate of return. Therefore, we never partake in the profits. If we're going to turn this into an ATM for the general plan, then let's do it right. Maybe we should take part in the sales profits. The Harbor Cove lease was sold in 2008 for $33 million. That's the apartments on the beach where the Chart House is at. That's 161 apartments. That lease is owned by Dr. Ginsburg, and they've done a substantial job raising rents and revenue there for the city. The city makes about $650,000 a year in profit off that lease. So a few weeks ago, I was told by Mr. Moses while I was getting signatures that this project budget's around $360 million. We've heard a lot of different numbers. In fact, somebody tonight said $500 million. Well, what's so important about that is we haven't seen that. Have you guys seen that? How much does a movie theater cost? Maybe to lower the cost of this project, we don't want a movie theater. In fact, the majority of the public have said that. They don't want a 700-seat movie theater. You know, when this lease gets sold from CenterCal to someone else or gets signed, what's the value of that lease? I've never heard that talked about. So what's the profit? LA County, when leases are sold in Marina Del Rey, those profits are given in part to LA County as part of the general revenue tax hikes. But it's okay because when the citizens vote on March 7th and they vote yes on Measure C, it's going to stop this whole plan. They're going to downsize this whole plan. We'll get rid of the movie theater by the sea. We'll get rid of the 4-story, 5-level parking garage. We'll stop them paving over the Seaside Lagoon, and we'll have to write a new business lease. Just like Dana Point did, how they did that correctly. They have 3 bidders on there for $200 million project for their current project right now down in the harbor. They've done it right. They have proper boat launch ramp and infrastructure. Thank you very much, and have a great night.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's the end of public comment, so no, I'm not going to beg anybody. There's no one hiding out there? Okay. So just before I got some questions, I have some questions here. My notes. So this first came to us in December 13th, so, and we are not voting on this tonight. This is, so you'll have the same opportunity on December, the end of this month, January, to come out, and we'll have the same public hearing. I want to make a few comments about the option. You know, I think Ian made a comment that it was an 11th hour throw-in by the staff, and it wasn't. Everybody up here was aware of it from our meetings, and you know, we do a lot of discussion about it in the back. But we do this, all the guts of the discussion out here in the public. So the option was there because the city didn't have control of the Fun Factory, which is what we're talking about here. So you always have to have it in there because we can't come up here as a body and say, we're going to sign a contract without control of the property. Now, that's on the next item of discussion. But everybody's aware of it. It's just that we put it out there, public people get to comment, and this council was aware of it, but acted on it. And the option part would never have gone through. But we're out here in the public, not like some other cities, so you can participate and see how the negotiations are going on. But and that moved along, and we're going on to the next subject. On the next issue on the calendar here. That's important because an option would have killed the whole deal right there. We weren't going to allow it to happen. Gina, we still get the beach. This isn't going to be on the beach down there. It's going to be in the harbor. So Mike will have a beach to go to. And one of the, the fact is, this is like, we're talking about that rent option of 9%, or we get 10% over 9%, and it's all complicated. Many of you in here have rented or leased an office or a home, but I've never had the ability to own my own office building when I was at Farmers Insurance, and I would have to go get an office. And you'd work on the deal with the owner for tenant improvements and the length of the lease. The longer the lease, and the more money you want to put it in improvements, the more upfront forgiveness they give you on your lease. You might get 6 months free rent, you might get a year, but you still have to invest money into it and guarantee that you're going to be paying for this lease. So this is common in business, and many of you in this room know that, and that's pretty much how it works out, but on a grander scale with harbor leaseholders. They're not exceptionally good business people because they're stupid. They know the art of a deal, and they know how to negotiate with cities or with private entities. But the council's got to make a decision on this. We have different numbers here. There's no reason. A lot of people have it. If you don't agree with the numbers, that means they must be wrong. But the fact is that this Senator Cal will be coming in here and putting up a substantial amount of money in the first year. I mean, they have to put up the money or it doesn't move on, and they have to make these improvements or it doesn't move on. And if they halfway through or 1/3 through, and there's a catastrophe and they run out of money, well, there'll be a way for the city to take it back. They don't just have an open-ended ownership of our harbor. But, I think that the city has to move forward. The decision here can't be based, or shouldn't be based on the outcome of the initiative. That obviously, if that goes one way or the other, it's a game changer. But at this point in our life, we have to move forward like with the rules we have now. If the citizens change that, then the council at the time will have to move forward in another direction with it. But right now, we're going in the direction that, on the basis that we are, there's no initiative. Now that'll only be 2 months from now or a month and a half, whatever it is, and then we'll find out if this was a colossal waste of time or not to go through all this exercise. But every great endeavor, because a few people come up here quoting Mark Twain or captains of industry. It's probably a quote I heard a long time ago. Every great endeavor involves some matter of risk, and nothing is risk-free. And we can sit out in the armchair quarterback and say that this isn't going to work, that's not going to work, this isn't going to work. But the company putting up the money is betting that it's going to work. And if it doesn't, they deal with it down the line. And we're not dealing with this for the next 2 or 3 years. That we're dealing with this for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So I'm one of the people said, I hope when my son comes home from college can go there instead of Pier Avenue. Well, by the time this is done, if everything went through smoothly, that son's kids will probably come home from college and go to there instead of Pier Avenue. This isn't like we're working on something to have us partying down there in 2 years. I'll be 64 in a few weeks. I'm hoping to live long enough to see something built, even if everything goes smoothly. So we got to think up here in a long-term situation and not what's going to happen in the next week. I got to think in terms of our kids, our grandkids, and how they may enjoy it. And then, we're always talking about what will happen in 66 years or 99 years. Go back 99 years what the world was like, and they couldn't even imagine what we're talking about now. They can't even imagine we have these things floating around. So who knows what the world will be doing in 50 or 70 years. We have to plan. Some other people in the future will be debating this again. about renovating the harbor then. They might come in on space capsules for all I know. But I'll hear from the council. But, you know, this bottom line is this, the council could vote yes or no on this, and it just moves it forward to the next step. Again, no matter what we do right now, there's nothing going to happen tomorrow. And then even if this was the final night, which is in 2 weeks, and everybody in this room will be back here again, and we'll go through the same thing again. But I think you just have to remember that we are not voting on this tonight, and it's just moving it forward, and this is an opportunity, because be transparent based on law and based on the city, is that to give everybody ample opportunity to review this. So I don't see lights on, but I'm sure somebody would like to talk. But if there's no lights on, we could, somebody make a motion to close the public hearing and move this along.
Continue the public hearing.
Yeah. I don't continue the public hearing. There's a light. Okay. I knew that would draw a light. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine the council isn't going to comment on what we've heard. In fact, I think the council should have commented before we took public comment and then commented again, so that you could have commented based on what we said and vice versa. Where do we begin? Steve and I are the ones that were up here when we started this repurchase of the leases. When I was elected to the council, we did not own the boardwalk, we did not own the Upper Pier Plaza, we did not own what I call the Decron lease. And we embarked on this plan to repurchase these properties so that we could aggregate and have a project that would attract a developer. And in the process of all this, we chose a developer and headed down this road. I didn't select CenterCal. I thought Pacifica was better, or Lowe's, who built Terranea, but we selected CenterCal. And, you know, I guess I just have to say the elephant in the room really remains the elephant in the room, and that is this project that is way too big. And so as I've walked the streets over the last however many months and just shown pictures of their model, almost nothing but opposition. Very few people think it's a good idea. Now, obviously, this room is a different ratio than what I'm finding out in the public. So I'm not swayed by the lopsided representation of people that are for this project, many of whom are in the industry or you know, trying to sell the retail, or involved with CenterCal, or been involved with other projects. And, you know, I think the 7,000 signatures that the residents got in 6 weeks in the middle of summer speaks volumes. And going forward, I listen and I look and I see incredibly, not only a big project, but I also see a risky project. And so while we have all these experts, and Cosmont and Associates doing a great job, our staff's doing a great job, we have all these experts, it's up to the elected officials to kind of give it the smell test and you know, really look at not only the expert testimony, but listen to the public and listen to really what's going on in the world. Okay, and the idea that you're going to build 525,000 square feet of brick and mortar in King Harbor, where 180 degrees is the Pacific Ocean, with fish that don't shop or go to the movies and be successful. I mean, don't people read the papers? I mean, I'm really, really nervous that this project is going to be a colossal failure. And Redondo Beach has a history of that. I'm not saying it's going to be a failure, but anybody who's not worried about that, and I'm disappointed that staff and Cosmont Associates did not bring us a failure mechanism, which I've asked for behind closed doors in closed session. We really ought to see the whole spectrum of possibilities of what could happen, because Redondo Beach has an incredible history of failures. Going back, way back, bonds defaulting. Yeah, bonds defaulted, that's right, the bonds defaulted on the harbor. It was the early 60s. The Upper Pier Plaza, where they built really only 65,000 square feet. I remember when that opened. I went to the restaurants down there, Sitar by the Sea, and it was a lot of retail. Everybody was so excited. It was all brand new. And that failed and had to be, quote unquote, repurposed. And so now we finally got it back up to 100% occupancy at like $2 a square foot. You know, $2.50, maybe $3. I mean, we're basically giving it away because Well, it's just was poorly designed. It was originally going to be retail dining, entertainment, didn't work, and so now it's mostly offices at very cheap rates with 180-degree ocean view. So Redondo has a history of this sort of thing, and I'm extremely worried in this day and age, in the way things are going. We have a failing mall in North Redondo, and I don't want to have another one in South Redondo, and, you know, Amazon, you name it, restaurants, especially high-end restaurants they talk about, come and go, and some do well, and the majority of them actually fail. So I want to know, you know, Larry and Will, and I've asked about this, and I've asked our staff, what is the failure scenario if this doesn't work out? If CenterCal can't make the lease payments? If, yeah, let's just start with that. CenterCal can't make the lease payments. They start falling behind on keeping it up as an A-grade facility like we have in the Alpif. I mean, what can unfold to the downside?
So to the question of if they aren't making their lease payments, so we have a contractual relationship with CenterCal. The contract specifies that they have to pay their rent. If they aren't paying their rent, then they would be in a default situation under the terms of their contract with the city. And at that point, if they remain in default, then the city has the opportunity to take the project back from the developer. That's the consequence of not paying their rent.
Okay, so if they can't pay their rent, then that's probably because they can't lease the properties, which probably means we're not getting the sales tax we were expecting. I don't know, TOT tax is pretty predictable, but we don't get the sales tax, property tax devalues. The general fund doesn't get the monies that we're expecting, and we're not getting the lease payments. But you say we take it over?
Sure, if they're not making they're truly not making a lease payment. In other words, they have a minimum rent payment that's obligated to be paid to the city. We outlined that it starts at $250,000 and grows to the $1 million in year 30. If they are simply not making a rent payment at all, they are in default of their contract, and the city would reacquire the project back from them. Now, as we've said, we don't expect that to be the case. And in the instance where they are maintaining the property, they have an obligation to continue to maintain the property to a standard. If they aren't maintaining the property to a standard, then they would be in default of their contract, and we would be in default proceedings again. So there are mechanisms that are built into the contract that if they are failing to perform as specified, not paying rent, failing to maintain property, then they would be in default of their lease with the city, and we would go through the proceedings necessary to reacquire the property from the developer.
Mike's not here right now. I wanted to ask our city attorney a couple of questions, so I'll let him. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Oh, all right, sorry. Mike, are we under any, I've asked this question before, I continue to get it. Is the city under any, is the city responsible for any of the costs incurred so far with CenterCal if we do not approve this Alpif?
No, as long as we don't violate the terms of the ENA to negotiate in good faith, you have no obligation to approve the Alpif and the corresponding leases.
So we have full discretion?
100%. We've made clear in every document up till now that the council retained full discretion.
So we could deny this Alpif ENA could expire at the end of this month, and then we are free to do however we want to proceed at that point.
That is correct. And we'll touch on that a little more with the next item that you have.
How do the other three actions that are going on affect this project? An appeal at the Coastal Commission, CEQA lawsuit, and Measure C?
Well, there are conditions, if you see in the Alpif, the proposed Alpif, there are a number of conditions precedent that have to occur before the lease ever occurs. And so, for example, if the Coastal Commission doesn't approve this, then notwithstanding the fact that an Alpif is entered into doesn't mean that the lease will occur. If there is the CEQA lawsuit, there is an obligation under...
So let me back up. So
Sure.
if the Coastal Commission denies the project or gives it some huge haircut and CenterCal decides, okay, we can't make this work, we're not under any obligation to them.
Correct. And again, you have a series of conditions that are both in the Alpif that are both things that in the city's interest that Caltrans, that Center Cal has to do and accomplish. There are some things that are city obligations that the city has to do. And, if permits are not granted by the Coastal Commission or the Army Corps of Engineers, any of those things, the project wouldn't go forward. As to the CEQA lawsuit, the second part of your question, there is an obligation in the, well, it's in the CEQA documents and also in, I want to say the reimbursement agreement, one of the previous agreements where they're obligated once we were notified of the lawsuit and we provided the notice to them, they have to decide whether or not to reimburse the city for our costs in defending the lawsuit. You weren't here last week. There was a unanimous 4-0 vote to defend the lawsuit, so we're in the process of doing that. Still haven't heard from Center Cal yet as to their choice. If they were to choose not to defend the lawsuit, if they were to look at it and to say, there's too much uncertainty, then the council would have the ability to undo all of the permits that the council authorized before. And
Or defend it ourselves.
you have that choice always, but the specific.
Three choices.
Correct. The specific you don't have to go forward and you can back out of the approvals you've given before if Center Cal decides not to defend the cost of the lawsuit. And then finally, the elephant in the room is Measure C. Notwithstanding the comments by the mayor or the official declared candidate for District 1, Mr. Nierenheim, it's uncertain whether or not the passage of that affects this for a variety of reasons that I've mentioned before that I put in the impartial analysis. And it's things like, and it's why I asked Nils, specifically to clarify what their view was, that this didn't need Coastal Commission approval. And it seemed to me that was the way they attempted to draft it, as you and I had the experience in fighting AES, the Coastal Commission staff at least doesn't necessarily agree with that. And so the question will be, the voters could approve it and it might not get Coastal Commission approval. Or it might not need Coastal Commission approval, but then the question is it already entitled because of the investing tentative map that was approved over the summer? So, and then there are also other questions as to what parts of it might go beyond a purely legislative matter, which is the only thing that can be addressed in an initiative. And so I tried to just point out in the impartial analysis these issues exist. I didn't want to get too much into it because it would go at the expense within 500 words of explaining what the initiative does. And I certainly didn't want to put my thumb on either side of the voting scale. But it is uncertain at best what happens if Measure C passes. It might end up offering a blow that is fatal to the project. If, for example, the Coastal Commission approves it, but it might not even have an impact depending on what the Coastal Commission does. And that's the hard part. It's a matter of just taking each step. And the next step is for the voters to decide whether they want to support the initiative or not. So all three of those things are impacting that, Councilmember Brand, and it's hard to know what the ultimate impact will be of any of them or of all three of them in conjunction.
Well, and also the boat ramp's under appeal, so if for some
Correct.
reason the Coastal Commission says, well, it can't be at Mole B, then that just upends and sends it back to the drawing board.
And if it doesn't need Coastal Commission approval, Mole B might be the one part that's not entitled based on the previous decision. So there are a lot of different pieces, and that's a very astute point that you just made.
Yeah, well, I'm really, really concerned about the size of this project. I have a lot of concerns. 35% of dining of 525,000 square feet is about the equivalent of about 15 Kincaids in King Harbor between Portofino Way and Torrance Boulevard. That's a lot of restaurant space, plus the restaurant space in the southern part of the harbor in Mr. Resnick's lease. So I'm really nervous about the size of this project and whether it will be successful or not. I think it's very risky. I guess one last question I have. Stephen, in your presentation, I wrote down a quote. You said, leased revenue taken offline and will be replaced with increased general fund revenue. I mean, I take that to mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I take that to mean that we're not going to get the lease revenue anymore in this ALPIF agreement. CenterCal is going to get the lease revenue, but we're going to get increased general fund revenue above and beyond what we would have been getting from leases in the harbor.
Yeah, I think that's generally the correct statement. I mean, we currently, when you look at the composition of the project and the parcels that are going to be included, could be included as part of the project, some of the leaseholds you mentioned, the Decron property, International Boardwalk, and Pier Plaza specifically, are leases for which we receive all of that lease revenue.
It goes into the uplands or the tidelands.
It goes into the uplands or tidelands, depending on, which side of the line that it's on.
Well, let me see what I'm getting at is it, it's like a transfer of the revenue to the harbor, to the uplands and the tidelands, is now going to go to our general fund. A lot of it. It's like a deflection of revenue flowing more to our general fund, which is kind of the whole point of this.
Well, everything, I want to be clear about separating sort of tidelands and uplands, because it's not the entirety of the harbor fund. Tidelands revenues will still need to be segregated into a tidelands account because of our obligations through the State Lands Commission in terms of reporting and expenditure for the tidelands component. So as we've looked at this and looked at the performance of the project, what we've looked at is really more focused on the uplands component of the harbor enterprise, and that lease revenues that are flowing to the uplands and general fund expenses that are flowing to the uplands will need to be adjusted as the project moves forward, because as you stated in your first part of your question, those lease revenues will go away as those properties are included. We'll still get a lease payment from CenterCal. We'll still get those capital improvements as part of the project, but the revenue we currently collect today from Pier Plaza, International Boardwalk, and Decron won't be available to us any longer, and so we will need to make the proper adjustments to account for that.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if we got another question for this. Yeah, so the idea of just this is either or, either it's CenterCal or it's all the city, is just ridiculous, right? There's a lot of permutations of a public-private partnership that could get the community to where they want to go. I've been saying this for a long time. We need to fold the AES property in. Every developer I've talked to who's considered buying the AES power plant site looks right across the street and goes, is that project going to happen? Where is that project? And what really needs to happen here is to fold those two properties in and consider, an overall comprehensive rezoning where you can put the recreational and open space uses down on the waterfront where they belong, like in every other city in California, right? And back up the commercial and spread out the impacts and have a bigger project, a bigger public-private deal that reduces the amount of public participation, and it's done right, and it's not just for revenue, it's also for the community. Because this idea of this piecemeal overdevelopment over here and then you're going to turn around and do piecemeal overdevelopment at AES, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. What's going to go at AES if you build this 525,000 square feet in the waterfront? They don't have much option except a bunch of residential, really, because how are they going to compete with that? And another hotel, right? So they've all folded their arms, right? And they're all ready to go. And the idea that Redondo Beach is not going to be in play if we don't do a deal with CenterCal is absolutely absurd. This is what developers do. They see this dense populated area in Southern California, and they want to work with us. They want to do a deal. And it's incumbent upon the city council to look at what the opportunities are and options and play all their cards, because this idea of embarking on this huge development plan is extremely, extremely risky, and I'm very concerned about it. Yeah, there's a lot of other ways to get this done. It's not just CenterCal Mall or nothing, or the city has to do it all. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. It's almost like an apples to oranges comparison. And I know there's a different opportunity out there that's not being explored. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Mayor Aswell. Well, I want to wish everyone a happy belated Martin Luther King Day. Got to have my kids for 3 days in a row. Anybody with kids knows what that means. And I want to, I thought actually one of my favorite Martin Luther King phrases fit the mood here tonight. What Dr. Martin Luther King once said was, "I've decided to stick with love. Hate is a great burden to bear." So let's all think about that. Young lady talked about the soul of Redondo Beach. I think this open debate is wonderful. This is what politics and public policy is all about. You have two sides that fight like hell to try and win, and in the end, there's one winner and there's one loser. So let's not have so much animosity for the other side. And I agree, there's no reason to get up and tell people they're not allowed to voice their own opinion. So my first question, maybe Larry and some of the guys over there, I know Jean Paul's up there. I'm curious, we didn't talk about living wage, use of any labor. Is this, any of this project, do we know, will there be a PLA involved, a project labor agreement involved in building this project?
I think that question's probably best answered by Jean Paul, understanding that at least some portion of it will be a PLA, but
No, which portion?
no, I think Senator Cal would have to offer that information.
Am I going to get an actual signed PLA agreement this time, or is it going to be blank again? Anyone remember that? Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun night for me. My hero.
Good evening, Councilor. Our intent is to use a large percentage of union labor, and
Your intent, is there a PLA signed right now?
there is not a PLA
Okay,
signed.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, I just wanted to, thank you very much for that answer. That's all, that's the only question I had.
Thank you.
But I'm glad to know there's intent. So, I'm going to limit my comments, and, you know, I think we're all up here to make the best deal for the city. And that's your job as a council person. You know, I'm just going to get back to what I've been pounding the desk about for the last 3 years. And, you know, quite frankly, it's the money. What assurances do we have that Senator Cal has the financial wherewithal to fund this project? We don't have any. We had a gentleman, I hate to put you on the spot, but you did say it, Layton, who's a vice president who studied this project, and I wrote it down too. Huge site issues, liquefaction, economically unfeasible, run from the project. So if the developer doesn't go through, I wonder, will Senator Cal reimburse us for the money we've spent so far, which, according to my calculations, is about $34 million, if you consider the Decron lease, what we're going to pay Shoemaker, the $14 million in infrastructure. So we get the keys back from Senator Cal. Well, we've already spent, you know, millions of dollars that our public is aware of. You know, and then further to comment, if they don't pay their lease or they can't fund the project, what penalties in place? I mean, what surety do we have? And you know, I'll let you answer the question, or someone answer the question.
So let me tackle it in a couple of ways, because I think there are two concepts being blended here. The first is sort of performance on the construction component of the project. And so as we enter into the project, one of the things that we indicated was a requirement for entering into the lease is having the security in place to ensure that the construction obligations are going to be met. So, and that is in the form of performance bonds and construction security. And so those are the things that we will want to see in place. In addition, We've done a first round of due diligence, which I believe Larry has reported out on previously, and we gave the highlights of that as our last presentation. And prior to entering into the lease, there will be another round of due diligence that will occur, and at which point, as indicated in the lease, there will be a developer financing plan that will be submitted, and it will detail all of their sources of construction financing as part of the project. So as we get ready to execute the ground lease and execute the performance of the construction of the project, there will be mechanisms in place to ensure that the construction will occur. If CenterCal, during the construction component of the project, for some reason exits the deal, then some of those security measures and performance measures will kick into place to ensure that the construction is completed. Secondarily, and sort of the second half of the question is what happens after the project is built? Well, after the project is built, if they fail, and this was the question Councilmember Brand asked, if they fail to pay rent, if they fail to live up to any of the obligations that is in their lease, then at that point they would be in default of their lease and the city would reacquire the property back.
So there's no penalty for them at that point? They just hand the keys back over?
Yeah, now, the penalty for them is they've spent $300 million on a project that they're not getting their return on
Well, we
their
haven't talked
investment
about
back.
the financing mechanism, so we're not sure that they're spending the $300 million. Could be investors.
Well,
I'm not sure it's
inve-
CenterCal that's spending the $300
Correct, whoever
million,
invests the
right.
capital into the
Right.
project
Right.
has 300 million reasons why they want to
Right.
make sure that the project is successful. So if the penalty would be the loss of the investment on the project.
Right. Okay. So I think that answers my question. So, another point, most deals like this, and I've been involved in a lot of them. I'm involved right now in Beverly Hills in the Wanda project, which I'm sure we're all aware of. There's lots of money spent on both sides. But in the end, each side gets reimbursed for expenses before anyone gets a return on an investment. And I wonder, have we ever considered this? Because I know CenterCal says they're spending millions, and we ask to see what they're spending it on, and they don't trust us. We're buying Decron, we're giving Shoemaker $9 million. It's obvious what we're spending money on. So have we ever considered some kind of agreement where, in the end, we total up what we've spent and look for some kind of reimbursement out of the profit of this project before, any possible returns on investment are given to anyone else?
Well, I would answer that the reimbursement agreement we currently have contemplates all direct expenditures associated with the pre-development process here, the pre-design process. Our obligations under the ALPIF are obligations under the ALPIF by contract. Our expenditures in leasehold acquisition to date, the $23 million that Stephen mentioned, it's now, we've got current debt on a little under $20 million, the potential $9 million with Shoemaker. Those acquisitions we've made to facilitate redevelopment and would still pay dividends in the event that we had to go a different strategy. Ultimately, we've been able to acquire site control, and it's given us an option. Our process to date has generated a partnership with CenterCal to move forward with a comprehensive waterfront project. If for some reason events in the future were to sidetrack that process and require us to go a different way, we would still maintain site control and have the ability to at least pursue an alternative way. In the absence of leasehold control, we have no option. We have no ability to move forward. So that's not a project expense that would, I think, in any public-private partnership contemplation, we would ever anticipate being reimbursed for by the partner, because ultimately we have control of the site, and if their project didn't move forward, we would seek alternative options.
All right. So next question, I guess I'm going to ask the city clerk, Eleanor, and I apologize if I misplaced it, which could have been the gentleman who came in with the letter from the Coastal Commission on Zuliger Park, and he's a gray-haired gentleman. He was here 1 week. He didn't have the letter. He came back the next week with the letter, gave it to you. And did you make copies and give that to us?
We put it, maybe, I don't know.
Okay,
I have to check with my staff.
so
But what
that's-
we do is we also put it on the website.
That's okay. I just, if I can get a copy of it,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
cool. So that's my question. So the man, and I can't speak really to it because I haven't read it, but for all intents and purposes, he made it sound like the Coastal Commission wrote us a letter at one time saying you can't block the view of Zuliger Park. I think that's what he was trying to say.
Measure G.
Measure G. Yeah. So how does a project like that, fit into this, this letter from, I mean, are we going to, at one point, I mean, what's your thoughts on that as far as, Coastal Commission coming in and saying this project blocks the view of?
Well, ultimately, the Coastal Commission is going to have to evaluate the entitlements that the city granted as part of its recent CEQA approval and sort of project entitlement process. So they ultimately will evaluate this project and determine and grant either approval, partial approval, or something else, or an outright denial. The city's position and ultimately the resolutions that you approved at the culmination of that CEQA and project review process were that we were in compliance as a city, that this project is in compliance with the obligations under our local coastal program, and in particular, the view restrictions that are associated with public views from Zulager Park. So this council, in its review of the project, has determined by resolution that we are in compliance with our LCP. Ultimately, the Coastal Commission will have to determine if our actions were appropriate.
Okay. So when will we discuss the type of financing mechanism that CenterCal will roll out? I mean, will that be part of a public discussion? Will they understand the type of financing that CenterCal will utilize to finance this project?
What I think we'll do as part of our next hearing in a couple of weeks is go through the due diligence process that's contemplated in the ALPIF in a little more detail. I think we covered that a bit in December. There's a lot of material here, and maybe we could afford to spend a little more time on it in 2 weeks to go through the specifics. But in general, if the ALPIF were to be approved, there is a specific checklist of items that we'll be looking for and evaluating. The first, as Stephen mentioned, is that performance bond that they have in place. And again, this would be the checklist that would have to be satisfied before granting the ground lease. So these are the conditions precedents that we have talked about as part of this process. So no ground lease is granted if this checklist of items is not met. One of those would be the performance bond from a construction standpoint. The other would be proof of financing. In particular, our review to satisfaction and approval of the loan docs as it relates to the construction loan for the project.
Is this going to happen before we vote in the ALPIF or after we vote in the ALPIF?
This is going to happen in ALPIF. They don't have these documents yet because they don't have a site control, effectively. The ALPIF provides site control.
So all this will happen after we sign the ALPIF?
After we sign the ALPIF.
So we're going to find out the financing mechanism after we sign this ALPIF?
After the ALPIF, before the execution of the ground lease, before the keys are handed over officially to Redondo Waterfront LLC.
So the point of departure here is that you have a two-stage process, and the reason you have a two-stage process because at this point, what the developer needs to give us the detail you're asking for.
No, I understand what you're saying, Larry, but the developers I talk to don't even know what an ALPIF is. It's not very standard, in this kind of development. So, I hear what you're saying, but hear what I'm saying. It just seems odd that we're going to sign some $400 million ALPIF and not know if it's an interest-based only loan, is it a 30-year loan, is it a fixed-rate loan? I mean, what kind of financing deal is this? I mean, you wouldn't buy, there's no bank in the world would give you money for a house without you signing you wouldn't take possession of the keys of a house before you do what kind of financing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think most developers would not know what an ALPIF is because most developers really don't have, frankly, the level of insanity to enter into a long-term 99-year ground lease for a large project. It takes a real different kind of scrutinous developer to want to do that.
And honestly, I think that comes out in the discussion on the type of financing.
Yes. So if you just permit me to say this, the reason why the ALPIF is critical is it's our protection to make sure that we don't hand over the keys before we see legitimate financing on a project. But in advance of that, the project needs to get defined sufficiently so the developer can go shop that construction loan and secure their equity financing.
Right, and again, what if he doesn't get the construction loan?
So that's kind of what I say. I don't mean to be tongue-in-cheek, but that's kind of the insanity of it, is because you're really in a large deal like this, when you're dealing with a public asset that all of you are trying to protect despite whatever your perspective is on the deal, you're all trying to do the same thing. The best way to engineer that protection is to have a pre-transaction document called an ALPIF, which sets forth the conditions upon which, if the developer performs and gets their money for the deal, you would then secure the ultimate ground lease, so it leads to the development of the project. That's really the way you do that, and it's going to be unique to long-term ground leases and public-private projects of this nature. It is not a creature that you'll find in a lot of transactions that are typical where, as you say, you buy the house, you have the documents at the time you buy the house. This time, you're pre-buying the prospect of leasing the house for a long-term period based on the fact that you can secure the financing, based on the fact that the deal allows you to define it well enough in the precondition document so you can shop and acquire that financing. It's a two-step process. It's a different creature, there's no doubt about it.
Right, and I think once we unveil the financing mechanism, we can really have that conversation.
And we're set up to do that.
And you know, listen, it's better safe than sorry. We've all heard that. And, you know, I read things like, does not show the downside risk to the city. All its scenarios assume success of the Center Cal project for 99 years. Well, I mean, you know, that's really hard to swallow, I'm sure, for anybody. I mean, show me something that's been successful for 99 years. So that's all I'm trying to do here is protect our financial interests. You know, someone said it, and they said it well. When things lose like this, you know who bears the burden? All of you. You're all going to, you don't want your taxes raised? Well, you better pay attention. And I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. I'm just saying pay attention, because if it does go down in flames, you're paying for it. Mm-hmm. That's it.
The person who wrote that letter wouldn't find a good thing to say about a sunny day, though, so it's Mr. Light. The public view, well, it's a letter there, we're not going to get compliments from that, so I know, it's just fine, though, but you got to remember, we have to take into account who says something. The public view, I don't remember the gentleman's name. Peter, that's right, yeah, Peter. I know from soccer way back when. I don't remember the letter, but it was something about the Measure G protects the view of Zuliger Park. And I know his main concern is Zuliger, and I don't know this for sure, is from conversations with him, that it wasn't Zuliger Park's view,
Oh,
it was his view.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it was.
I didn't see the letter, so I
Came
can't
back,
really-
it was his view and not, again, I'm not looking at the plan right now, but the Zuliger Park view was protected, but that view wasn't. So, and at the end of the day, if there's no financing, there's no deal. If it falls off, then they're out and we're back to square one. So, and you know, it just, we're sitting here criticizing this potential big investor in Redondo Beach. And again, I'm not worried about considering 99 years from now, because that'd be ludicrous for us to think about 99 years. They want a 99-year lease so they can renegotiate in 40 years or something like that. But this project is a 40-year, it's 99 years from now, we're in fantasy land as we can even think about what the world may be like in 25 years. So we are having vision, that's why we're doing this. You know what, when you come to the podium, I tend to be quiet. So I expect the same courtesy. It's no one up here is perfect. We're trying to figure out what to do, and we want to know, we have to sign leases for 99 years. No company's going to sign a lease, no matter which company would be picked. If we started over at ground zero, right, we would, no one's going to want to do anything for a 25-year lease, period, end of subject. So, short of selling the property, it's not going to happen. As far as AES, a lot of our issues with them, they're a separate entity. It'd be in another fantasy land, or in a perfect world, we could maybe put them together. But we have all up here talked to various potential developers and investors, and it's not everybody that's running a way bill because they worried about the harbor project. There's other people that are willing to invest money with very small downsides. You wouldn't even recognize what they're talking to us about, and they've told Bill the same stories. But it's a separate issue, it's separate property on a different timeline, and we're not at Irvine 1971 starting out from scratch and making a planned community. This is all infill. So we are not an Orange County city that can start from scratch. Anyway, let's try and, I know everybody wants to talk some more, but let's try and move it along, because we're going to have this all over again in a couple of weeks, so when we really debate it. So go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Mayor Aspel. I mean, I definitely disagree with that last thought. This is an opportunity to put the two properties together, and the timing is unbelievable that it's now for sale and that this E&A could be coming to an end. The timing is absolutely perfect. But I had a couple questions, Stephen. Why don't we have, I brought this up, why don't we have participation in a sale? If this project goes well, and CenterCal gets their occupancy, or they make it through 2 years and things are going gangbusters, and they go and they sell their lease at a huge profit, how come we don't get to participate in that? We have that agreement with other leaseholders. How come we don't have that in the Alpif?
It's the magnitude of the upfront investment. We've had other leases where we can participate in the sale of transfer, where the leaseholders have acquired that leasehold with minimal investment in the space. None of our leaseholders have made an investment in public amenities to this magnitude. We have nothing close to it. And by way of CenterCal ultimately spending over $100 million on public infrastructure, plazas, boardwalks, parking structures, et cetera, the notion of their transfer and our expectation that we would achieve a portion of that sale is not something that they were willing to extend to us.
Okay. And lastly, who are the potential leaseholders? I mean, what businesses, what restaurants have signed letters of intent? I mean, it'd be nice to know before we signed a 99-year lease who the potential lessees might be.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, Mr. Brand, as you know, the part of the due diligence process was for Cosmont to take a look at the leasing plan and leasing strategy, which we have done. That strategy and plan, because it's pre-market, in other words, these are deals that are unfolding, are confidential on behalf of the developer. So there's not the level, I think, of capacity here to really identify specific lessees. Unless the developer wants to do it. That would be their prerogative, and you can ask John Paul to come up if he wants to speak to this. In looking at the leasing plan, I think you saw one of the gentlemen on the leasing team tonight speak to us. We noted that the leasing team is highly capable, well-versed of what I call significant specialty and diverse retail and entertainment projects, which is a much different and more recent product in the retail leasing space than we've ever known in this country. I mean, we built, as you know, years and years of standard closed malls, and only in the last 15 years has there been a steady iteration and evolution to sort of an open-air a mix of public and private spaces with various uses such as entertainment, retail, restaurants, and specialty in a way that is meant to, leverage, in this case, the waterfront and bring a high level of trips to the facility in a way that supports sales at the level that they need to be supported. We looked at that leasing plan. It is highly articulated across a number of categories, not only categories of tenants by product type, whether it's restaurant or retail, but subcategories of restaurant, types of restaurant, subcategories of specialty food, subcategories of retailers, whether it's clothing, leisure, or other, subcategories of sports and athletics. I mean, there is a very nuanced plan that I think casts a broad cloth over the retail industry and the food industry as we know it today. They're leaving no stone unturned. We were impressed with the quality of prospective leases. We are impressed with the lease conversations they're currently having. We just can't disclose more than that. And I think, John Paul Wardy, if you want to add to that, and I'd appreciate it.
Given the sensitivity of those negotiations, Counselor, I think we're not at a liberty to discuss those tenants today. But as soon as we sign those leases, we'll be happy to share that with you.
So you can't sign the leases till we do the output?
Correct.
So we don't get to know who before we sign this?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
That's it? Okay, Laura.
Okay, so we're in a difficult situation. We don't have the money for all of the infrastructure needs, and there's wants in those numbers that they keep going. But we can either choose to see the opportunity in the difficult situation, or we can focus on the difficulty on every opportunity that's being presented to us. They say that luck happens when preparation meets opportunity, and the LA County is seeing a massive investment. We're seeing the Measure R and the overwhelming support there was for that to help with the traffic issues in the LA County, because believe it or not, Redondo Beach is not the only ones that have traffic issues. We're also seeing it in the George Lucas Museum, the Bank of California Stadium for soccer. We're seeing it with the Rams/Charger Stadium, which is, all of this is going to create an opportunity in which we'll have Olympics, possible Olympics. We've already got the Super Bowl coming in here, and we need to be ready to participate in the economy of the entire LA County. So we either participate or we get left behind. And so we've spent years preparing for this. So I think it's time for us to digest this for the next couple of weeks before we go in there. Look at all at least all the pros and cons of it. And regarding the presentation that was made, you have the two far out scenarios. And as far as having a smaller project or a different contractor in there, they can't speak to that because they don't have those exact numbers or terms on there. You can assume that it would be somewhere in between. So you either have the worst case scenario, which is where we'd have to pay for it all ourselves, or we have this scenario in which the developer is assuming, from what I'm hearing tonight, assumes a majority of the risk of whether this fails or whether this doesn't. So that's the key factor here. They're assuming that risk for us. So anyway, with that and the thought of that, and I'm going to have a lot more to say on January 31st. But I move that we continue this hearing. I guess we technically have to close it and then continue it?
No, we continue.
We just continue. I move that we continue this hearing. Let me get the exact wording back.
Second.
And then we receive and file the Cosmont reports pursuant to the AB 562 and AB 806.
And there's a second. Okay, Christian.
Okay.
But you want to speak? He wants to speak.
I just want to just touch base on a few things that were brought up tonight, and we'll go out with some clarifications. So Bill's not wrong in saying that there could be other options, right? Tonight we're presented with a couple options for simplicity's sake, would be my guess, right? Because we're just, if we start to present every single potential option out there, we're going to be here for weeks on end. So this is really for a simplistic, understanding of where we're at and what our options are, whether we go it alone, because we don't potentially have other partners or other deals. If like that's all speculative. So right now it's what we've been working on or going it alone. And if we go back to that, and I really invite everybody out there to go through and read through that Cosmont report that is online, along with everything else that's out there. Everything here is fully transparent and accessible to the public anytime you want it. I also recommend that you go and you look at our financials online, which go back for 5 or 6 years, and just look at how the harbor's performing, how Seaside, you can do all that. You can look at it and you can gain that information all for yourself. But the waterfront project, the break even was best case scenario 11 years, worst case scenario 23 years. The city only was best case scenario 49 years, best case scenario 67 years. So in the waterfront project, there's a chance that actually everybody in this room might see that come to fruition. In the city only one, we'll all be dead. And I don't say that, to be funny, but I say it because it's true. It's almost like when we talk about Measure M. There's a lot of projects that the county is doing with Measure M that I'm never going to see come to fruition. And actually, the other interesting thing about that too is that a lot of those transportation projects might not even be necessary because things might change so dramatically, as the mayor pointed out. It's hard to foretell the future. And the changes that will come. I would have never imagined that in my pocket would be a video camera, phone, and computer. So the AES and waterfront site coming together, there's the word piecemeal keeps coming up over and over. I hear it here, when we're talking, I hear it out from residents or, out on social media. And the reality is historically, if we go back, the harbor area was actually leased out in a very piecemeal way, way more piecemeal. And much to the disservice probably of the city in some ways, that now we can look back with hindsight and say, oops. And I think what you see, and Larry, you can speak to this probably, but over the process of when you came on as a consultant and ultimately developed the Cosmont plan, and then the business plan, the idea was that, as Bill said before, was aggregating assets together so that something generative could be done as opposed to in a piecemeal fashion. Would that be a correct statement?
Yes, and I think that's why the notion of reimbursement for those costs would be like, I've used the analogy of the house. We owned this big house that had been run down in a good neighborhood, but we didn't own all the bedrooms. We went and picked up the rest of the bedrooms we didn't own, and now we have a whole house that still needs fixing, but we control our destiny. Even if the first choice, if it's this project, falls apart, we've holistically put together the whole house so that we can remarket it. And that's, I don't think, a fair reimbursement cost. There's, we're always like to be aggressive in terms of getting into the developer's pocket as much as we can, but that was really you as a city getting back that which you needed to further this property at any level. And so those are those expenses, those costs.
And I can understand the fear out there because it's a big change, right? But most people in the past 20 or 30 years, especially since the pier fire, have not really, they've seen the pier as it is. The biggest changes they've seen is what Mr. Resnick has done, in the past 3 years to his leasehold. That's the biggest change you've seen since 1988. Okay, now you've seen Kincaid's or Ruby's, you've seen like a couple things happen here or there, but the biggest, facade change or, was what just happened at the Resnick lease site. So the reality is that since 1988, we haven't invested, whether that's right or wrong, going back to what some former council people said here recently, or accusations that fly out there, we haven't done a good job of being the landlord, and I think we're trying to make right on that in many ways. It's a little late, and so therefore our costs are astronomical to do that, but we can't push it off any longer. We shouldn't be pushing it off any longer. I think we have discussed it over and over. And if you go back and look at the last general plan, you'll see that there was discussions and drawings in there that showed a vision of what is happening in this area now was thought about back then. Now that was much bigger, and even in the heart of the city drawings, it was way more dense and extremely, huge. And And I think, you know, the process that the city went through since Heart of the City was rescinded, the many years, you know, the advisory votes, the Cosmont plan and business plan, you know, these were all things that led us to where we are today. So I just don't feel like we're rushing. But let me just ask a couple questions just to so when we talk about our harbor funds, just so that everybody is clear, rent payments go into the harbor funds, right? So the lease payments for tenants in those areas, whether Tidelands or the Uplands, those go into the harbor funds directly, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then any revenue generated, sales tax revenue, that automatically goes to the general fund, right?
Correct again.
And that won't be changing in this scenario?
That's correct.
That's correct, okay. So, the participation rent, so that, I can see how that would be very confusing to people, Larry and Will. You know, you look, and I mean, I think even in, you know, closed session, that was something that you know, we needed to kind of delicately talk about, right? Because you're looking at, in the original MOU, the 25/10 versus now our 10/9. And I'm just wondering if you, for public's sake, if you can just kind of give a little bit of a taste as to why there is such a dramatic difference there. Stephen kind of touched on it a little bit, but, you know, if you can, because I don't know that everybody fully understands what that means in the grand scheme of participation rent and how the city benefits or doesn't benefit.
Thank you, Councilmember. So the difference between the 10 and the 25,
right?
The share, yeah, absolutely. So under the MOU, the original deal term was that the city would receive 25% over a 10% return. And as you expressed, now the term is that the city will receive 10% over a 9% return. The difference is that when we look at the costs associated with the project, as we sit here today, they are greater than one might expect looking at them 3 years ago. And so projecting a 10% return now to the developer on an unleveraged basis, which is the basis of the calculation, is much more speculative and difficult versus projecting a 9% return. So what happens is, as the costs go up, our chance for getting a excess or participation return would go down. And so we saw that happening, and we as a city said we want to maintain the ability to participate in the success of the project. We, in looking at the costs associated with the project, we have less certainty about the opportunity to get to a 10% return and therefore participate at all. And so by in an effort to enhance our opportunity and increase the possibility and potential for us to participate in a return, we reduced that threshold to 9% from the 10%, and as correspondingly took a 10% share, which we think is a benefit to the city because we're much more likely, first of all, to hit that 9% threshold, and over the period of the lease, we're much more likely to achieve that 9% earlier on. And so we think it's more money, and it's more money on a present value basis than the alternative.
And I should note that we call these waterfalls. I mean, these are pretty, as you know, as complex portions of this deal are, and we know that. You know, one of the standards of real estate is that it is frequent to see a parsing of the profits, if you will, based on a waterfall where the developer puts in total amount of cost, gets an X% return as a priority, and then other interests, in our case a landowner, would participate in that waterfall subsequently. And that's what this really is. It's it's two stages. It says the developer puts up $300-400 million, gets their 9% return of cost, and then basically we get to participate over that baseline return as a waterfall. And that is a way to help the public sector beyond this capital improvement program that gets delivered to us to really, and beyond rent, to, capture some additional upside in the project as it may occur over a period of time. The idea, as well as indicating, of bracketing down to a 9% was to increase the possibility and frequency in which that could happen, given the high level of cost of the project.
Sure. Okay. So the last thing I will say is that, Councilman Samarco is right. It's important that we understand the financing, and we did touch on it in December. And I'm glad, Mike, that you said you'll bring it back again just for kind of a reiteration next time, because as I recall, Larry, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is something you do for a living with a lot of other cities and a lot of other projects. And when we did this last round of due diligence, I think you said you were so thoroughly impressed with both CenterCal and their partner Westport, and their ability to finance the project.
Yeah, and really, I would characterize it this way fairly. The level of resources available, committed to this project is significant and well covers the obligations we foresee. And, developers, in the world of development, we are in that business. Not all developers are as well capitalized. Not all equity sources are as well endowed. And so we found that to be a thoroughly positive conclusion.
No, and I think it was impressive to the council, and it's unfortunate, that it's only at this point that the public actually gets to start hearing about that, because you have every reason to be skeptical or concerned. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I think what's most important here is that our harbor, our pier, our waterfront is self-sustainable, and it's cared for in a way that we didn't necessarily do for the previous 99 years. We don't want to leave a hot mess for our kids and our grandkids. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that has gone into this well before my time up here on the council.
Martha.
Thank you, Mayor. I will keep my comments short. It's been a long night this evening and full of emotions and opinions for all involved at either side. I just have a couple of things. First of all, let's reiterate that we will have another 2 weeks, all of us. It's not just the 72 hours since you've had this ALPIF and the pursuing documents to review it. We've had discussion. We can all go home and take a look at it, spend 2 weeks reviewing it. Please know that you can reach any of us as well as you can reach staff for any of the questions that you have as you look through these documents and get more information about it, as well as contacting any of us. I do pay careful attention to everyone's comments, and I do take copious notes on your name, if you give your full name, and what your district is and exactly what it is that you're trying to comment. And I not only agree with those against the project that don't want to be called names and don't want to be marginalized in their opinions, but at the same time, I have to disagree with my colleague, Councilman Brand, when he expressed tonight that those that are here for the project are employees or in some way connected consultants with the project, because I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people here that are private citizens not employed by the project or any way tied to consultants. And I noticed that, and that is of note. So I just wanted to clear that up, because I do have everyone's name that has spoken, and I try to keep that through every single hearing that we have, along with your notes and what you said. So I do very much pay attention. And we are here to look at these same documents as you do and decide what is best for our city based on what our constituents want, that they communicate to us when we talk to them, when they call us, when they email us, and when they come here. And that is the decision we are tasked with. We are trying to decide what are the best public amenities for our community, the community that we all love. And we also try to figure out what are the best capital improvements to provide the public benefit and to create revenue for the city. We live off of the revenue for the city. Let's not forget, we pay for public safety. We pay for infrastructure from the benefits that come into the city. And I know maybe that's a little simplistic, but let's remember this is what we have before us. So let's take the time to look at it. We have to look 2 weeks to digest this, to ask questions, and to continue this public hearing, and to come back to this process. I appreciate those that are respectful, those that keep their comments logical and civil more than you know. So thank you to all of you. I only have one comment. I'm sorry, I know you were ready to go to the next person.
No, we're
and it's
good. I
late.
just thought it was late.
Just
Come on,
one
so-
comment on something
half hour.
Mr. Smarco brought up, just because I wanted to clear it up. And again, the Decron lease and buying the Decron lease was before my time. But he brought up, we've talked about the money that CenterCal loses if they walk away and this project doesn't work. And he said, well, what about our money? Who's going to pay us back for the Decron lease or Shoemaker? But correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be missing something, but I think that's a little different. CenterCal walks away and they have nothing. From the Decron lease and Shoemaker, we have an asset. So I think it's a little bit different. We actually, unless I'm understanding something incorrectly, wouldn't we have an asset?
We would continue to have control of that leasehold, which would continue to give us options.
Bought something. We don't lose it because CenterCal walks away.
That is correct. And right now, we used debt. We used a lending financing instrument for us to acquire that property, and we are servicing that debt through revenues from the property today. And we'll get to what would be our next phase of that as part of the next item potentially.
Right. So whether we bought Decron, which again was years before my time, for CenterCal or for whatever reason, we still got something in exchange. To where on the other end, CenterCal has poured some money and they won't have anything if they walk away,
I don't
correct?
think we voted on that yet.
What's that?
I don't think we voted on that yet.
Hello.
No, we didn't vote. I'm talking about the Decron lease you brought up, that we've spent money that on the Decron lease, and when do we get our
Well, I
money
was
back?
talking about the Shoemaker property. you
She has
bought.
the floor.
I think you mentioned both, Councilman?
I did.
Decron and Shoemaker, so that's what I was asking about. Right, I understand. So, and Decron was earlier years before. So I move that, oh, there might be someone else that wants to talk.
Good, Bill. We
That
already
we
have a motion.
continue as we have.
We
oh,
have a
already
motion. Yeah, we have a
Okay,
motion.
We already have a motion.
Good, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to say I didn't imply that there aren't any Redondo residents that aren't for this project. I was just pointing out that there are a lot of people in favor of it that really don't live here, and they're professionals, and they're in the industry, and they're coming and doing, what they do, and that's fine. But it appears, that it's somewhat lopsided, and there are no real professionals on the residents' side. They're just residents who have concerns about the project. So that's all I was trying to point out. I know there's residents in Redondo that are for this. I've spoken to several of them. But in my experience in the last few months, just knocking on doors of people I don't know, just randomly, it's not even close. The vast majority of people, when you show them a picture of their model, want nothing to do with the project. I think it's way too big. That's the only point I was trying to make.
Can we call the question?
Done?
Done, thank you.
There were, yeah, okay, not gonna get into this thing. Okay, is there, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Who's in favor of break?
Oh, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to make a
We have
motion for break.
For break,
Motion
go
for
ahead.
10-minute break.
We are gonna take a break.
Finish. Goes 20 minutes. That goes 20 minutes. I'd rather finish. Christian, the hard, I was going to say is, but I'm less dense.
No, I was going off of, I had, Pat left a bunch of books. Yeah, when I took over. And,
Right now, it's 657,000 square feet, all spread.
are back. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Councilmember Barbie?
Here.
Councilmember Brand?
Here.
Councilmember Horvath?
Here.
Councilmember San Marco?
Here.
Councilmember MD?
Here.
Mayor Astor.
Here. Okay, this is not a public hearing, but we are going to go to, this should only take 10 or 15 minutes. Approval of a sublease amendment and a settlement agreement with Redondo Fisherman's Cove Company. So which staff member is going to tackle this?
This will be Mike Wazansky.
Okay.
I'll cover this one since Stephen did the heavy lifting on the last. And this is really a follow-up to the conversation we just had. For the last decade, we've had an aggregation strategy for our harbor area leaseholds to allow us to put together enough space to avoid what has been our history of piecemeal development and construct a comprehensive project. As you saw bear out in December, there was one final leasehold that the city had not yet acquired and did not have the ability to acquire, and it resulted in us effectively having to design the project around the timing of the termination of that leasehold. That was really the genesis of the option that was discussed in December. We simply did not have the ability as a city to deliver the site for a full completion of the proposed project. Since that time, we've continued our negotiations with the leaseholder, Redondo Fisherman's Cove Company, and we're pleased to report that we have negotiated a deal that would allow us to purchase the leasehold and ultimately terminate the business that exists today. Additionally, we've been able to approve or develop and negotiate a settlement agreement that would release both parties from all outstanding claims. As those who have followed the history between RFCC and the city know, there has been a litigious history, and this settlement agreement would allow us to, as I said, sort of put those claims to bed and move forward in a dispute-free path. The deal itself ultimately would obligate the city in 36 months' time to spend $9 million to purchase the leasehold and terminate the business. RFCC would have to vacate the premises at that 3-year date. Additionally, the way the deal is structured is in the event that the waterfront project is approved and ultimately the Redondo Waterfront LLC is able to meet all of the conditions precedent to lease execution, meaning in short that the waterfront project moves forward, the owner of RFCC would receive an additional $1 million payment. Now, in the event that